The harbor at Cragmore Cove had never held so many people in dead silence, and Isaac Holloway would remember the particular quality of that quiet for the rest of his life. The way the gulls stopped screaming overhead, the way the fishing nets hung still on their drying racks, the way 40 grown men who had spent their whole lives hauling cod out of a cruel sea suddenly could not look up from their own boots. 12 orc warriors stood at the end of the stone pier, hide cloaks snapping in the wind off the gray water, spears grounded but ready, and at their head stood a woman who made the whole village forget how to breathe. She was tall even among her own kind, all corded muscle wrapped in fitted battle leathers the color of dried blood, a war braid of black hair falling over one shoulder and threaded through with iron rings that clicked softly when she turned her head. A curved, tusk-hilted blade rode at her hip, and across her back was strapped a war hammer whose head was notched from use. Her tusks were small and sharp, her skin a deep mossy green weathered by mountain wind, and her eyes, when they swept the crowd of frightened fishermen and farmers gathered at the base of the pier, were a startling amber, like firelight caught in dark water. This was Zarkha Bonecrusher, second daughter of No One, first sword of the Ashwind clan, who had earned her byname 3 winters before by crushing the skull of a rival war chief in single combat rather than let her people be driven from their hunting grounds. The elders of Cragmore Cove had begged for this parley. The Ashwind clan had lost good warriors to human steel in the border raids of the past year, and the humans had lost good boats and good sons to orc axes, and both sides had finally, grudgingly, agreed that another winter of blood would leave nobody left to bury. But first, by Ashwind custom, there was the stare. It was an old test, older than the treaty itself, and every villager on that pier had heard the stories, that an orc warrior would lock eyes with whichever human dared stand closest to the front of the crowd, and if the human broke first, looked away, flinched, wept, it proved to the clan that the humans were prey animals not worth the dignity of a treaty. No one wanted to be the one chosen. No one wanted to be the coward who doomed the parley before it began. Zarkha's amber eyes swept the crowd once, slow and deliberate, and every man and woman she looked at found something urgent to study on the ground. Every one of them, save for a lean, sun-browned trapper of perhaps 22 years, standing near the fish stalls with a coil of trap wire still slung over one shoulder, because he had come down from the mountain that very morning and had not even had time to go home before the town crier dragged half the village to the harbor. Isaac Holloway did not look away. He did not know later why he hadn't. He would tell Zarkha, years afterward, that it was not bravery. Bravery would have been a choice, and there had been no choosing in it at all. Her eyes had simply found his, and something in him had gone very still and very quiet, the way the forest went quiet before snowfall, and he had simply kept looking, because looking away had never once occurred to him as a possibility. Zarkha's stare fixed on him. The crowd noticed. A ripple went through the fishermen, through the old women clutching their shawls, through the elders standing near the harbor master's shed with the treaty scroll trembling in old Tobias Renner's hands. Whispers. The trapper boy. Look at the trapper boy. Zarkha's warriors went utterly still behind her, spears no longer merely grounded but planted, waiting. She held his gaze. He held hers. It went on long enough that gulls dared return to wheel overhead. Long enough that the tide could be heard sighing against the pier pilings. Long enough that Isaac's chest began to ache from forgetting to breathe properly. And still he did not look away, because there was something in her eyes that was not hatred and not contempt but something far more startling, a kind of fierce, searching curiosity, as if she were trying to read something written very small on the inside of his skull. Her amber eyes were beautiful. He noticed that even then, even with 100 lives hanging on the outcome of a staring contest, even with her clanmates' spears not 10 feet from his chest. He noticed the fine scar through one dark eyebrow, the proud set of her jaw, the way the wind off the water pulled loose strands of black hair across her cheek, and she did not move to brush them away because moving in that moment would have been surrender. And then she blinked. It was so small a thing. A human might have blinked 100 times in the span of that silence and no one would have thought anything of it. But orcs did not blink first. Not in the stare. Not ever. Not in 3 generations of Ashwind memory. And certainly not their most decorated young warrior. Not in front of her own honor guard. Not in front of a village of frightened fish gutters and net menders. The silence afterward was a different kind of silence. Isaac heard one of the orc warriors behind her shift his grip on his spear. He heard old Tobias Renner exhale like a man who had been holding his breath since spring. He saw something flicker and die behind Zarkha Bonecrusher's amber eyes, not anger, though anger came fast on its heels, but something rawer. Shame. Naked, furious shame, the kind that a proud person feels down in the marrow, the kind that does not fade with time no matter how much time is given to it. She turned away first this time, too, spinning on her heel to face her own warriors, and said something low and sharp in Orcish that made 2 of them look at the ground. Then she turned back, jaw set like iron, and announced in the common tongue, voice carrying flat and hard across the water, that the human had a spirit worth reckoning with, and the parley would proceed. The treaty was signed that afternoon on a barrelhead at the edge of the pier, both sides trading salted fish and iron nails for furs and mountain amber, and everyone in Cragmore Cove went home that night telling the story of the trapper boy who hadn't blinked. No one told the story of the orc woman who had. Isaac never spoke of it either, not because he was ashamed, but because some instinct told him it was not his story to spend like a coin in a tavern. He caught one more glance from her before the Ashwind warband turned and marched back up into the gray mountains. One long, unreadable look thrown back over her shoulder, and then she was gone, and the mountains swallowed her, and 6 years passed. He kept trapping the high line above Cragmore Cove through all of them. He grew leaner, harder, quieter, the kind of man villagers nodded to on the road and did not stop to talk with, not from unkindness, but because he had never given them much to talk about. He never married. There had been a woman once, a fisherman's daughter named Agnes Marrow, who had wanted him to give up the mountain line and mend nets for a living, and he had tried for one whole winter before the walls of the cove began to feel like a trap sprung on him, and she had married a boat builder instead and did not speak ill of him for it. Isaac did not blame her. He had simply never been able to explain, even to himself, why some restless thing in his chest would not let him settle. He told himself it was the mountain he loved. The truth, buried somewhere he did not often visit, was that some nights, alone in his line cabin with the wind screaming through the pines, he thought of amber eyes that had held his without flinching, right up until the very last second, and he wondered where in those hard gray peaks she was, and whether she ever thought of him at all. She did. Zarkha Bonecrusher thought of him more than she ever forgave herself for. She rose in the years after the treaty to become the Ashwind clan's first sword and the chieftain's chosen war captain, feared by rival clans and respected even by the coastal humans who came to trade at the seasonal fairs. She never told anyone, not her clan sisters, not her own father, about the shame that sat in her like a splinter that would not work its way out. That once, in front of her whole honor guard, she had broken the stare first, and it had been because of a human trapper's steady, curious, unafraid eyes. She told herself it meant nothing. She told herself 100 times over 6 winters that it meant nothing. She never took a mate. Suitors came, warriors of her own clan and others, drawn by her strength and her rising name, and she turned every one of them away with a coldness that her clan sisters whispered about behind her back. She did not tell them that some nights, alone at the edge of the war camp with the stars wheeling overhead, she found herself picturing a lean, sun-browned face she had seen for perhaps 3 minutes of her whole life, and hating herself for the ache it put in her chest. The winter that changed everything came hard and early, 6 years after the stare, dropping snow on the Greyfang peaks a full month before it had any right to, and it did not let up. By midwinter the game had gone strange and scarce. driven low by the cold, and both the Ashwind clan in their high camps and the fishing village of Cragmore Cove down on the rocky coast were feeling the pinch of it in their bellies. Fragile treaty, 6 years old and never much tested, groaned under the strain the way old rope groans before it parts. Rumors ran through the village that the Ashwind clan meant to break the peace and raid the coast for grain stores. Rumors ran through the Ashwind camp that the humans meant to close the mountain passes and starve the clan out entirely. The village council met in the long hall above the harbor, lantern light guttering against the storm outside, and argued long into the night about what to do. "We send an envoy," said Mayor Corwin Ash, a stout, balding man who had held the position for a decade and hated every winter that tested him. "We renew the treaty terms before some fool on either side does something we can't undo. Salted fish and oil for whatever furs and amber they can spare. It kept the peace 6 years ago. It can keep it now. And who rides up into a war camp in the dead of winter to hand-deliver that offer?" asked Garrett Vane, a broad-shouldered fisherman who had lost a brother to an Ashwind raiding party a decade past and had never once let the village forget it. "You, Corwin. I'd wager not." It was old Tobias Renner, white-haired now and stooped with age but still sharp-eyed, who spoke up from the back of the hall. "There's a man who knows that mountain better than any of us, who's traded with the clan at the seasonal fairs without losing his scalp. And there's a man they remember, too, the one who held the stair 6 winters back. Might be that name still means something up there." Every eye in the hall turned to Isaac Holloway, who was leaning against the back wall with his arms crossed, having come in only to report a wolf pack denning too close to the low pastures, and who suddenly found himself the center of a conversation he had not asked to be part of. "I'm no diplomat," he said. "You're alive, and they respect you," Tobias said. "That's diplomat enough for a mountain in a blizzard." Isaac looked around the hall at Corwin's pleading face, at Garrett Vane's scowl, at the dozens of families who would starve or bleed if the treaty broke, and felt the old restless thing in his chest settle, for once, into something like purpose. "I'll go," he said, "but I go alone and I go my own way on my own line. I'm not marching a delegation up through Widow's Pass in this weather to get us all killed by a slide before we ever reach the camp." They compromised. Tobias himself, too old and too stubborn to be talked out of it, insisted on accompanying him as far as the lower switchbacks with a mule load of salted fish and a keg of lamp oil as good faith, and 2 younger men to help manage the animals. Isaac agreed only because he knew the old man would follow on foot if refused outright. They set out 3 days later under a sky the color of a healing bruise, snow already spitting sideways off the peaks, and climbed. The trail Isaac knew as well as his own hands took them 2 full days up through stands of black spruce bent double under snow load, along frozen stream beds, past the crumbling stone watchtower that marked the old border where humans and orcs had once fought pitched battles a generation before either of them was born. Tobias's cough worsened with the altitude and the cold, and by the time they reached the lower switchbacks below Widow's Pass, the old man could barely keep his saddle. "You'll turn back here," Isaac told him, helping him down and wrapping him tighter in furs. "Take the mule and the boys and go home. I'll carry the offer up myself." "You'll die of exposure before you die of orc spears, up there alone," Tobias wheezed. "I've wintered worse country than this," Isaac said, which was not entirely true, but it settled the old man enough to let himself be turned around and led back down the mountain by the 2 younger men, grumbling the whole way that Isaac Holloway was a stubborn fool who'd get himself killed for a village that barely thanked him for his furs most winters. Isaac watched them go, then turned his face up into the wind and kept climbing alone, a pack of salted fish and a small keg of oil lashed to his back along with his own gear, snowshoes crunching a lonely rhythm through drifts that came to his knees. He reached the Ashwind camp 2 days later, half frozen, snowblind in one eye, and was seized by 2 spear-wielding sentries before he'd gone 100 paces past the tree line, hauled roughly through a scattering of hide tents toward the great fire at the camp's center, where the clan's chieftain and his war captain sat in council. And there, rising from a seat near the fire with her hand already dropping to the hilt at her hip, was Zarkha Bonecrusher. 6 years had sharpened her rather than softened her. The same tall, powerful frame, wrapped now in a heavier winter version of her fitted leathers, dark fur lining the collar and cuffs, the iron rings still threaded through her war braid. Though there were more of them now, each one a mark of some deed Isaac would never hear the story of unless she chose to tell it. Her amber eyes found his face across the firelight, and for one suspended moment neither of them said anything at all, while the sentries still gripping his arms shifted uncertainly, sensing something in the air they did not understand. "Let him go," Zarkha said, quiet, and the sentries obeyed instantly. Isaac straightened, snow melting off his shoulders in the firelight, and found he did not know what to say to a woman he had spoken not one single word to in 6 years, whose face he had nonetheless carried in some quiet corner of his mind through every one of those winters. "You're the trapper," she said. It was not a question. "Isaac Holloway," he said. "I came from Cragmore Cove. We've brought an offer fish, oil, to renew the treaty terms before this winter breaks something neither side can mend." The chieftain, a heavy-set, gray-bearded orc named Draken Ashwind who bore 3 long scars down one side of his face, studied Isaac for a long moment before grunting something to Zarkha in Orcish. She answered without taking her eyes off Isaac's face, and whatever she said made the old chieftain's eyebrows climb. "My father asks if you are the same human who broke the stair with me 6 winters past," Zarkha said, and there was something careful in the way she said it, something guarded, as though the memory cost her something even now to speak aloud. "I remember," Isaac said simply. "I never forgot it." Something moved behind her amber eyes, surprise, maybe, or something rower that she covered quickly by turning back to her father and speaking again in low, rapid Orcish. The council argued a while longer, weighing the offered supplies, weighing the risk of trusting a treaty that had already once nearly failed, while Isaac stood shivering by the fire and Zarkha watched him with an expression he could not quite read. At last the chieftain grunted his assent. The terms would be renewed, the fish and oil accepted as good faith, and in the spring a proper delegation would travel down to the cove to formalize things further. But the storm outside had worsened while the council spoke, howling now against the hide walls of the great tent with a fury that made even the seasoned warriors glance uneasily toward the entrance. "You cannot go back down tonight," Draken Ashwind said, in halting but serviceable common tongue. "The pass will kill you before you reach the switchbacks. You will stay. My daughter will see you settled and take you down herself when the weather breaks." Zarkha's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but she did not argue with her father in front of the council, and Isaac was too grateful for the promise of shelter to think much, in that moment, about what it might mean to spend the storm-bound days ahead in close company with the only woman who had ever haunted him for 6 long winters without his ever knowing her name. She led him to a smaller tent at the edge of the camp, gave him furs and a share of dried meat, and left him there without another word that first night, though he noticed she posted herself outside the tent flap for a long while before finally retiring, as though she trusted no one else with the duty of guarding him, or perhaps did not trust herself to be far from him, though neither of them would have said so aloud. The storm did not break the next day, or the day after that. It worsened instead, a true mountain blizzard that buried the camp under drifts higher than a man's head, and turned the world outside into a shrieking white wall through which nothing could be seen past an arm's length. On the 3rd day, with visibility gone to nothing, and even the seasoned Ashwind hunters unwilling to leave their tents, a support pole in the tent Isaac had been given cracked under the weight of accumulated snow, and the whole structure began to sag dangerously inward. Zarkha found him hauling gear out into the blinding white, cursing, trying to save what he could before the tent collapsed entirely, and without a word, She seized one end of the ruined hide covering and helped him drag his belongings across the camp to a smaller, sturdier shelter. A line hut of stacked stone and timber near the camp's edge, built generations ago as an emergency refuge and rarely used, tucked into a fold of rock that broke the worst of the wind. They collapsed inside it together, breathless, snow melting off both of them in the sudden relative quiet. And it was there, in that single cramped stone shelter with one small fire pit and one narrow pile of furs, that they were effectively snowed in together for the better part of 5 days while the blizzard raged on outside, indifferent to treaties or shame or the particular ache of two people who had spent 6 years not forgetting each other. The first day was awkward silence and careful distance, both of them keeping to opposite sides of the small fire, speaking only of practical things: how much dried meat remained, how to ration the little firewood they had, how long a storm like this might reasonably be expected to last. Isaac tended the fire with the same patient competence he brought to everything, and Zarkha watched him do it with an intensity she told herself was simple wariness, though it did not feel like wariness. Not really. Not the way her pulse quickened whenever his eyes happened to meet hers across the flames. On the second day, boredom and cold wore down the walls between them. Isaac asked her, hesitantly, about the iron rings in her braid, and she told him. This one for the war chief she'd killed to earn her byname. This one for a raid 3 winters back where she'd pulled 2 of her clan sisters from a collapsing mine. This one for surviving a winter fever that had killed half her hunting party. He listened to every story with a quiet, genuine attention that she was not accustomed to receiving from anyone, orc or human, and found herself talking longer than she meant to, filling the small stone hut with the sound of her own voice in a way that felt dangerously good. She asked him, in turn, why a man would choose to live alone on a mountain line when he could have a warm house in the village below, a wife, children, a life with people in it. Tried that once, he admitted, poking at the fire. Almost had it with a woman named Agnes. Couldn't make myself want it enough to stay for it, and that wasn't fair to her, so I let her go find someone who'd want it properly. He was quiet a moment. Some restless thing in me never settled. Figured maybe I just wasn't built for settling. Or you were waiting for the right reason, Zarkha said, before she could stop herself, and then looked away into the fire as though she had not meant to say something so plainly true. On the third day, the cold worsened despite their careful rationing of firewood, and by nightfall Isaac's hands had gone stiff and pale at the fingertips, the early bite of frost creeping in despite his gloves. Zarkha noticed before he did. She had seen frostbite claim fingers on lesser men in lesser storms, and without asking permission, she took his hands in both of hers, her grip warm and impossibly strong and careful all at once, and pressed them between her own palms, and then, when that was not enough, tucked them beneath the collar of her furs, against the warm skin at her throat, holding them there while he sat frozen not from cold now but from sheer astonishment. "You'll lose fingers being stubborn," she said, gruff, not meeting his eyes. "A trapper needs his fingers." "Zarkha," he said, and it was the first time he had spoken her name aloud since arriving at the camp, and something in the way he said it, low and careful, like it was a thing worth handling gently, made her breath catch. "Do not," she said, though she did not pull his hands away. "Do not what? Say my name like that. Look at me like that." Her amber eyes finally met his, fierce and unguarded all at once, 6 years of buried shame suddenly very close to the surface. "You are the only man who ever held my stare, Isaac Holloway. Do you understand what that cost me? I am Bonecrusher. I do not blink. I have never blinked, not once, not before or since, in front of anyone, and I blinked in front of my whole honor guard because of you. Because your eyes did something to me I did not have a name for, and I have hated myself for it every day for 6 winters. Isaac went very still, his half-frozen hand still held against the warm skin of her throat, and when he spoke it was with a gentleness that undid her more thoroughly than any declaration could have. "You think that was weakness," he said. "I never thought it was weakness. I thought it was the single most honest thing I ever saw another living soul do in front of a crowd of strangers. You looked at me and you saw me, Zarkha, actually saw me, not a coward, not prey, not some fisherman's boy to be tested and dismissed, and it scared you because it meant something, and I have thought about that moment more nights than I would ever admit to another living person. You should have looked away, she said, voice rough. It would have been easier. I know, he said. I couldn't. She did not answer with words. She answered by finally, after 6 years and 5 days snowed into a stone hut on the side of a mountain, closing the small distance between them and pressing her forehead to his, her breath ragged, her strong hand still cradling his cold fingers against her throat. And when he tilted his face up and found her mouth with his own, it was slow and careful at first, a question more than a claim, and then not slow at all. Because 6 years of denial has a way of collapsing very quickly once it is finally allowed to. They did not speak of it again that night, not in words, but something had shifted permanently between them, and when the fire burned low they lay together beneath the shared furs for warmth, her arm heavy and protective across his chest, his face pressed into the crook of her neck, both of them finally still. The storm broke on the 6th day, leaving the mountain buried under a fresh white world, silent and blinding under a hard blue sky. Zarkha insisted on escorting Isaac down herself, over her father's mild protest that a lesser warrior could do the job. A protest she silenced with a look that told the old chieftain everything he needed to know and more than he perhaps wanted to. The two of them made the long trek down through Widow's Pass together, breaking trail in turns, and by the time the gray rooftops of Cragmore Cove came into view against the iron-colored sea, something had settled between them that neither one intended to let go of again. The village did not welcome her easily. Isaac had known it would not, and still the sight of it stung him. The way conversations died in the harbor market when Zarkha walked through it at his side, the way mothers pulled children back from doorways, the way Garrett Vane spat pointedly into the mud near her boots and muttered something about orc scum thinking they could walk among decent folk. Zarkha bore it with the flat, contained pride of a woman long accustomed to being feared and mistrusted. But Isaac saw the tightness at the corner of her jaw, the way her hand drifted, unconsciously, toward the hilt at her hip whenever a villager's glare lingered too long, and it lit something hot and protective in his chest that he had never felt on anyone else's behalf before. It came to a head on the 3rd day after their return, in the open square before the harbor market, with half the village present for the fish auction. Garrett Vane, drink-cloud and emboldened by a knot of like-minded fishermen at his back, stepped into Zarkha's path as she crossed toward the trading post with Isaac at her side, a crate of the clan's traded amber balanced against her hip. "We don't need her kind walking free in our square," Vane said loudly, playing to the gathering crowd. "My brother bled out on Ashwin spears. I'll not stand by while one of them struts through our market like she owns it." "She's here under treaty, same as she has every right to be," Isaac said, stepping between them before he'd fully decided to, his voice carrying flat and hard across the square, the way it had once carried, unknowing, at a very different confrontation 6 years before. "Move aside, trapper. This isn't your fight." "Everything about her is my fight," Isaac said, and the certainty in his own voice surprised even him. "You want to put a spear through someone today, Garrett. You'll put it through me first, and then you'll answer to the whole clan for breaking a treaty over your own bad temper. Is that truly what you want your name remembered for?" The square had gone dead silent, the way it had gone silent 6 years ago on the pier, and Isaac felt the eerie echo of it settle over him even as he held Garrett Vane's furious glare without flinching. Behind him he heard Zarkha shift, setting the crate of amber down slowly, deliberately, her hand not going to her weapon but simply resting open at her side, a warrior choosing, visibly, not to escalate, choosing instead to let a human man stand between her and a mob for the first time in her long, hard life, and something about the sheer unfamiliarity of being defended rather than feared or fought. Cracked something open in her chest that 6 years of shame had never managed to touch. Garrett Vane held Isaac's stare for a long, ugly moment, then spat again, muttered a curse, and stalked off through the parting crowd with his companions trailing sullenly after him. The tension broke slowly, villagers drifting back to their business with sidelong glances and low murmuring, and Zarkha stepped up beside Isaac, close enough that her shoulder brushed his. "You did not need to do that," she said quietly. "I know," Isaac said. "Wanted to anyway." She looked at him a long moment, something warm and fierce moving behind her amber eyes, and said nothing more. But her hand found his, briefly, fingers lacing through his own in full view of the retreating crowd, a small and quiet claim that said more than any speech could have. Spring came slow and grudging to the coast that year, ice breaking up late in the harbor, the fishing boats putting out again with cautious optimism after the hard winter. And with the thaw came the promised formal delegation from the Ashwind clan, traveling down at last to properly seal the renewed treaty in a ceremony at the harbor, with both village elders and clan chieftain present to sign terms in ink and blood, as custom on both sides required. It should have been a triumphant day. Mayor Corwin Ash had arranged for the whole square to be hung with nets strung with dried flowers, casks of the season's first cider broached for the occasion, fishermen and clan warriors mingling with wary but genuine goodwill for the first time in a generation. Zarkha stood at her father's side near the treaty table, dressed in the same fitted battle leather she always wore, though someone in the clan camp had worked fresh dye into the hide and polished the iron rings in her hair until they shone. And Isaac watched her from across the square with a pride that felt entirely too large for his chest. It was into this fragile, hopeful gathering that the raiders came. They were not orcs. That was the cruelest twist of it, the thing that would make the days telling and retelling for years afterward such an uneasy story. A band of some dozen human deserters and outlaws, led by a scarred, hollow-eyed man named Silas Crane, who had once run with a border militia before turning to plunder when the militia disbanded. Men who saw a treaty ceremony crowded with both clan gold and village coin as an opportunity too rich to pass by, and who cared nothing at all for the fragile peace they were about to shatter. They came out of the fish market crowd with weapons already drawn, fast and brutal, seizing the confusion of the gathered celebration to their advantage. 2 of them grabbed Mayor Corwin Ash and held a blade to his throat near the treaty table. Others fanned out to block the square's exits, and Silas Crane himself, grinning with the particular ugly confidence of a man who believed he held every card, seized the nearest man he could reach in the chaos, who happened, by the cruelest accident of positioning in that crowded square, to be Isaac Holloway. "Nobody move," Crane bellowed, dragging Isaac backward with a dagger pressed hard against his throat, "or the trapper dies right here, right now, in front of your precious treaty table." The square erupted into screaming chaos, villagers scattering, clan warriors surging forward with weapons drawn only to be halted by Crane's men shouting threats against the hostages. And in the space of 10 heartbeats, the joyful ceremony had become a standoff with blades at 2 men's throats and 40 terrified onlookers frozen in the crossfire. Zarkha moved before conscious thought caught up with her body, shoving past her own father, past the frozen ranks of Ashwind warriors, until she stood directly before Silas Crane with nothing but 10 feet of open cobblestone between them, her hands raised, empty, weapons still sheathed at her hip. "Let him go," she said, and her voice, pitched to carry across the whole square, did not shake at all, though her heart was hammering harder than it had in any battle she had ever fought. "Take me instead." The square went dead silent, the same terrible silence that had fallen once before on a very different pier 6 years past, and every villager, clan warrior, outlaw turned to fix on the tall orc woman standing exposed and unarmed in the open square, offering her own life to a man holding a knife to a human trapper's throat. "Zarkha, no," Isaac started, but Crane pressed the blade harder against his throat, drawing a thin line of blood, and the words died in his mouth. "You're worth 10 of him in ransom, Orc," Crane said, eyes gleaming with sudden greedy calculation, though he did not loosen his grip on Isaac. "Chief's daughter, aren't you? First sword of the clan. I could name my price to your father and he'd pay it rather than lose you." "Then name it to me directly and let the human go," Zarkha said, taking one slow step closer, her open hand still raised, her amber eyes never leaving Crane's face. "Cut him loose, take my weapons, bind my hands, and I will walk with you wherever you like without a single struggle. You have my word as first sword of the Ashwind clan, and my word has never once been broken." "Zarkha, stop this," Isaac managed, blood trickling warm down his throat, terror for her rising in him sharper and more consuming than any fear he had ever felt for himself. Don't you dare trade yourself for me." "I would trade everything I have for you, Isaac Holloway," Zarkha said, not looking away from Crane even as she said it, her voice cracking with an emotion so raw the whole square seemed to feel it. "And I would count it the finest bargain of my life. You held my stare once when the whole world looked away. I will not look away from you now." Sila's Crane, greedy and unimaginative, saw only a rich ransom standing unarmed before him, and did not understand what he was truly witnessing, a warrior who had spent 6 years believing herself weak for a single unguarded moment, now choosing, in front of her whole clan and an entire terrified village, to lay down every shred of pride and safety she possessed for the sake of one ordinary trapper, without hesitation, without regret. He grinned and shoved Isaac roughly toward one of his own men, reaching for Zarkha's wrists with a coil of rope, already congratulating himself on the fortune he was about to make. It was the single instant of distraction Isaac needed. Stumbling forward under the shove, he twisted instead of falling, driving his elbow hard into the ribs of the outlaw who had caught him, wrenching free of the man's grip with the sudden desperate strength of someone who has just watched the person he loves offer her life for his and cannot, allow that trade to be completed. He seized a fallen fish-gutting knife from an overturned market stall, the only weapon within reach, and drove forward not at Crane but at the rope in the man's hands, slashing it from Zarkha's wrists before Crane fully registered what was happening. Zarkha did not need further invitation. Free hands meant everything to a warrior of her training, and in the space of 2 heartbeats she had disarmed Crane with a brutal twist of his own knife arm, driven her elbow into his jaw hard enough to drop him senseless to the cobblestones, and turned, weapons still not drawn because she had not needed them, to find the rest of his outlaw band already being overwhelmed, clan warriors and village fishermen alike, momentarily united by shared fury at the ambush. Closing in from every side of the square now that the hostages were free and the moment of paralysis had broken. The fight, such as it was, lasted only moments more. Crane's remaining men, leaderless and outnumbered, threw down their weapons rather than face both an armed clan warband and an angry mob of fishermen wielding gutting knives and boat hooks. No one on either side of the treaty was killed. 2 of the outlaws suffered broken bones, and 1 fisherman took a shallow cut to the arm, binding it up with more pride than pain. But the square, moments before a scene of terror, settled quickly into stunned, breathless quiet. Isaac dropped the fish knife and crossed the remaining distance to Zarkha in 3 long strides, and she met him halfway, her strong hands coming up to frame his face, checking the shallow cut at his throat with a fierceness that made her fingers tremble despite themselves. "You reckless, foolish, wonderful man," she said, voice raw. "You should have let me go with him. You should have let me trade myself properly." "Never," Isaac said. "Not while I have breath in me." "You think I'd let you walk off with that man after everything?" His voice broke, and he pressed his forehead to hers the way he had once before in a snowed-in stone hut on the mountain. "After everything we've already survived to get here, Zarkha. I would rather have died in that square than watch you walk away in chains for my sake." "I offered because I could not bear the thought of losing you," she said. "I have spent 6 years believing myself weak for a single blink. I am not weak, Isaac. I have never been weak." But I would have surrendered everything, every shred of pride I have ever built for your sake, without a second thought, and if that is weakness, then I welcome it gladly, so long as it is you I am weak for." He kissed her then, in the middle of the harbor square, in full view of the entire village and the entire Ashwind clan and her own father the chieftain and old Tobias Renner, and even Garrett Vane, who for once had nothing ugly to say, only stood in stunned silence along with everyone else, watching the first sword of the Ashwind clan kiss a mountain trapper like the whole world had narrowed down to just the two of them. When at last they broke apart, breathless, Zarkha's father Draken Ashwind stepped forward through the murmuring crowd, studying the two of them with an expression that mingled surprise, wariness, and something that might, in an old scarred warrior's face, have passed for approval. "My daughter," he said slowly, "has never in her life offered herself for another living soul. Not clan, not kin, not chieftain." He looked at Isaac with new and careful appraisal. "Whatever you are to her, trapper, you have earned the right to be it openly before this whole gathering, without shame from either side." "I intend to," Isaac said, and found Zarkha's hand already reaching for his. The treaty was signed that same afternoon, delayed but not derailed, ink and a careful ceremonial drop of blood from both the mayor and the chieftain mingling on the parchment, while the square, still buzzing with the astonishing spectacle of the standoff and its resolution, watched with an energy that felt, for the first time in a generation, like genuine hope rather than grudging necessity. That night, with the outlaws bound over to be marched to the nearest garrison town for judgment, and the square finally quiet under lantern light and a clear spring sky thick with stars, Isaac found Zarkha standing alone at the edge of the harbor, looking out over the dark water where the fishing boats rocked gently at anchor. "You never told me," he said, coming to stand beside her, "why you never forgave yourself. Not truly, not the whole of it." She was quiet a long moment, the wind off the water pulling at loose strands of her dark hair. "Because I believed, for 6 years, that the moment I blinked was the moment I stopped being what my clan needed me to be," she said finally. "Unbreakable, unshakable, and I could not reconcile the warrior my people needed with the woman who could not stop thinking about a trapper's steady eyes for 6 long winters. I thought loving you, even the idea of you, would make me smaller somehow, less than what I was meant to be. And now," she turned to look at him, amber eyes soft in the lantern light, all the old fierce guardedness finally, fully gone from them. "Now I think I have never been more myself than I was standing in that square today, offering everything I have for you in front of my whole clan," she said. "I do not need forgiveness for blinking first, Isaac Holloway. I needed only this, to stop punishing myself for the one moment I ever let someone see me plainly. You saw me plainly 6 years ago. You have seen me plainly every day since. I am done apologizing for it." He reached for her hand, and this time there was no hesitation in either of them, no 6 years of denial standing between the touch and the wanting of it. Only two people, finally, fully choosing each other in the open air with the whole wide sea stretched dark and endless before them. They were married within the month, in a ceremony that blended both their worlds in a way neither village nor clan had ever attempted before, vows spoken in the common tongue before old Tobias Renner acting as village witness, and afterward a binding cut made across both their palms, pressed together in the old Ashwind way, sealing a promise neither of them intended ever to break. Garrett Vane did not attend, though he did, grudgingly, nod to Isaac in the harbor market some weeks later, which Isaac took as close to an apology as the man was likely to offer, and did not push for more. By the time high summer settled warm and golden over Cragmore Cove, Isaac had built a cottage at the edge of the village, close enough to the harbor that Zarkha could watch the fishing boats come in each evening, close enough to the mountain trail that Isaac could still walk his line when the season called for it, though he found himself lingering closer to home more often than not these days, unwilling to spend more nights away from her than duty strictly required. Zarkha had found her own place in the life of the cove, to everyone's surprise but her own. She oversaw the harbor's defenses now, training a mixed watch of fishermen and visiting clan warriors together, her reputation transforming slowly from a thing villagers feared into a thing they were grateful to have standing between them and any future trouble the wild coast might bring. Children who had once been pulled indoors at the sight of her now ran to greet her at the market, tugging at her fingers to show her some prize shell or carved trinket, and she indulged every one of them with a patience that still occasionally startled Isaac, who had once thought her the fiercest thing he had ever seen, and now understood her to be simply, fully, whole fierce and gentle both, as a person is allowed to be once they have stopped hating some part of themselves. On the evening that closed out that first full season of their marriage, with the last golden light sliding down over the water and the harbor bell ringing the fishing boats safely home, Isaac found Zarkha exactly where he always found her at day's end, standing at the edge of their small garden overlooking the sea, watching the tide come in. He came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, and she leaned back into him without needing to look, the way two people do when they have long since stopped needing to check whether the other is truly there. "Do you ever think of it?" he asked quietly. "That day on the pier, 6 years before any of this." "Every day," she said. "But not with shame anymore. I think of it now the way I imagine other people think of the moment they first fell in love, sudden and frightening and entirely out of their control." She turned in his arms to face him, amber eyes warm in the fading light. "You were the only man who ever returned my stare, Isaac Holloway. I spent 6 years believing that meant I had lost something precious. I understand now that I had only just found it." He kissed her then, slow and unhurried, with all the easy certainty of a love that no longer needed proving to anyone. Not to the village, not to the clan, not even to themselves. And behind them the tide rolled steadily in against the rocky shore, patient and eternal, while the harbor lanterns began to glow one by one against the coming dark, lighting the small, hard-won, thoroughly chosen life they had built together at the edge of a wild and beautiful sea.